They stood in a circle around the first bell as morning light spilled through the forest canopy, casting dappled shadows across the soil. The bell no longer pulsed with threat. It waited calmly, like an elder at the edge of a village fire, ready to listen. For the first time since the loops began, no one was afraid. Chinelo stepped forward, the journal tucked under her arm, its new cover glowing faintly. The others watched her closely: Amara, Kwame, Zinzi. All marked, all changed, all chosen in one way or another. She placed a hand on the bell. It was warm, living. She took a breath. We have to decide. Do we keep hiding this? Let it sleep until someone else wakes it? Kwame answered first. Number. That's what got us here. Every generation silenced the last. Zinzi nodded. If we bury it again, the cycle starts anew. The forgetting. The ringing. The lost Amara looked up from where she sat, carving the spiral symbol into a nearby stone. Then we don't bury it, we plant it. Chinelo tilted her head. What do you mean? Amara stood. We turn the bell into a story. Not a curse, not a secret, a truth. Something others can remember before it's too late. They stared at the bell in silence. Then Chinelo opened the journal and began to read aloud. From the beginning. Isi's words, their own. Io's sacrifice, the vault, the choice, the tree, all of it. With each word the forest responded. Roots curling, leaves swaying, the wind humming like a chorus beneath her voice. When she finished, the bell rang. Not loud, not haunting, clear, true. And every bird in the trees took flight at once. Because the bell wasn't waking the curse anymore. It was calling the memory. The bell's clear note echoed through the trees, down into the roots, and, somehow, outward. Across the school grounds, windows shook gently. A ripple passed through the stone foundation. Birds paused mid-flight. Students blinked mid-conversation. Something shifted. But no one panicked. Because this time the sound wasn't laced with fear. It didn't claw at the soul. It called to something quieter, older, a need to remember. Chinelo closed the journal and looked up at the others. Did you feel that? Kwame was already nodding. It didn't ring at us. It rang through us. Zinzi looked toward the path leading back to Abongweni. We can't keep this to ourselves anymore. But who will believe us? Chinelo asked. Amara answered without hesitation. Those who already feel it. Those who've had the dreams, the gaps in time, the unspoken memories. She lifted the carved spiral stone and pressed it into the soil beside the bell. We leave a marker, not just for us, but for anyone who hears the next echo. That afternoon, they returned to the school. And for the first time they spoke. Quietly, carefully. Only to those who needed to know. The curious, the sensitive, the forgotten. They formed a circle of keepers, listeners, watchers. They didn't call it a cult. They didn't call it a legacy. They called it the guard of the first bell. Their task was simple. When echoes rose, when silence deepened too far, they would remember. And if needed, they would ring it again. That night, Chinelo placed the journal in the school library, on a shelf no one had touched in years. The cover was blank to most eyes. But to those who had heard the ring, it bore 5 words. Tell it before time forgets. For days, the school was still. No new carvings, no visions, no phantom footsteps in the corridors. Just the quiet peace of a world trying to forget what it had survived. But memory is not a passive force. It resists being buried. And so, when the whispers returned, they didn't come from the bell. They came from the walls. Amara was the first to notice it. Words written in chalk reappearing on blackboards moments after being erased. Names no teacher remembered assigning to their roll calls. Assignments referencing events that had never been taught. Then came the dreams. Zinzi woke screaming one night, hands trembling, muttering, "There's something under the story." A name we never read. Kwame had begun sketching symbols unconsciously during class. Spirals that bled into thorned circles, eyes crying roots instead of tears. Chinello brought the journal back out of the library and reopened it. The pages were no longer blank. They were bleeding. Not with blood, but with ink. Black ink pouring upward from the base of each page like it was drowning in forgotten history. She turned to the others in the guard. "We were wrong to think it would sleep. Memory doesn't fade. It fights." Kwame stepped back. "Then what are we remembering that we shouldn't?" No one spoke, until Amara said, "We never asked where the first bell came from. We just assumed it grew here." Zinzi paled. "You're saying it didn't?" Chinello looked down at the journal as a new line wrote itself across the last page. "Before the first bell was sown, something rang in the dark." Kwame whispered, "There's a before." And in the courtyard, the tree shed a single leaf. It hit the ground with a sound like a soft bell. And below the earth, something else woke up. The next night, the stars disappeared. Not behind clouds. They were simply gone. The sky above Abongweni stretched black and empty, as though the universe itself had turned its face away. And from that darkness, a low hum began to vibrate beneath the school's foundation. Not a bell, not quite. Something older. Chinello stood in the courtyard, eyes fixed upward. "It's not from the tree," she said. "It's not from here." Amara knelt beside the journal, which now pulsed steadily like a drumbeat. The ink had receded, revealing a single page, one not made of paper but something like skin. Etched onto it was a shape no one could name, a circle broken by 3 lines, bleeding inward. Kwame recognized it first. "I've seen this before. In my grandfather's carving shed. He called it the mark that came before stories." Zinzi's voice cracked. "We've been guarding the first bell like it was the origin. What if it wasn't? What if it was the remedy?" A deep groan rumbled through the soil. Trees bowed, windows rattled, then the sky split. Just for a moment, a line of red lightning carved across the heavens, and in that crack, they saw it. A bell, floating, rotating, but not made of wood or stone or even metal. It looked like bone, and it rang. No sound, only silence so loud it pushed into their lungs and made them forget. Names, faces, seconds of their own existence. Zinzi dropped to her knees, gasping. "What? Was that?" Amara's eyes were wide. "That was the one before all memory." Chinello's voice was barely a whisper. "The bell, before language." Then the journal closed itself, and the tree in the courtyard cracked. From inside, a second voice whispered, "Tell no one, or all shall ring." By dawn, time had fractured again. The clocks at Abongweni spun without order, some faster, some slower, some reversing entirely. Shadows fell in directions that made no sense, and reflections in windows blinked when no one did. The bell carved into the tree no longer glowed. It bled. Thick sap, black as ink, dripped from its cracks and pooled at the roots. The ground around it hissed where the liquid touched. Nothing would grow there now. Chinello paced the dormitory with the journal clutched to her chest. "It's not just memory anymore," she said. "That thing in the sky, it's feeding on what we don't say." Zinzi stared out the window. "Then maybe we were wrong to keep guarding it." Kwame shook his head. "We were trying to protect people. We were taught to." "Exactly," Chinello said. "Taught by a story that was already broken." Amara flipped open the journal. New pages had appeared overnight, not written in ink, but scratched into the paper like claw marks. One phrase repeated, "The bell before the bell." The silence beneath the root. The truth that screams itself quiet. She looked up. This This isn't prophecy. It's a warning. The first bell wasn't the beginning, it was the barricade, the patch over something far older, something that wants to be remembered so it can ring again. The air in the room shifted, the lamps flickered, and then every student at Abongweni, every single one, spoke a word in unison. A word no one had ever taught them, a word none of them remembered saying. Kithari, Zinzi whispered. What does that mean? Amara didn't look up. It's the name of the bell before names. Kwame paled. And we just spoke it. The bell in the sky began to turn again. The moment the students spoke the word, Kithari, the world tilted. Literally. Books fell from shelves. Birds scattered in panicked spirals. A heavy stillness settled over the school like the hush before a storm breaks. But worse was what came next. Every word written in the school began to shift. Textbooks reworded themselves. Chalkboard lessons melted into symbols. Even the letters stitched into uniforms reconfigured, no longer spelling school initials, but fragments of the word they'd unknowingly spoken. Kithari. Amara fell to her knees, clutching her head. It's not just a bell. It's a language, a memory of something that predates memory itself. Chinello ran to the tree, now oozing ink from every knotted limb. It was never guarding us from loops. It was shielding us from this. The journal flew open in Kwame's arms. Pages flipped in a blur, faster than eyes could track. One page burst into flames. Another bled ink like tears. Then, in a clean corner, fresh script wrote itself. You gave it a voice. Now it speaks. Zinzi shouted. We have to unspeak it. Reverse it. There must be a counter. Chinello's voice was shaking. There is no counter to an original. Amara stood slowly, eyes distant, trance-like. It's not trying to kill us. It wants us to remember it fully. Speak it again. Let it finish its name. No! Kwame shouted. If we do that, it becomes real. Not memory, not story, flesh. A wind rose from the ground, not above, from beneath. The earth exhaled. Then across the courtyard, every student turned toward the sky, and they spoke again. Kithari, Ryan. The sky split. The tree groaned. And the bell in the sky, now bone-white and hollow, opened like a mouth. The bone bell hung in the sky like a wound torn into reality. Its surface was no longer smooth. It rippled, like skin stretched over breath. And from its hollow center something began to emerge. A shape. No body, no face. Just a presence made of sound and silence at war with each other. Chinello staggered back, shielding her eyes. It's not ringing anymore. No, Kwame said, his voice low. It's speaking. The language had no letters, no rules, but it shaped the world as it formed. The sky split into red cracks. The tree in the courtyard grew impossibly tall, scraping the clouds, bleeding bark down its sides. The students moved in perfect unison, their eyes blank, their voices layered with echoes. Kithari Rien. Amara gripped Chinello's wrist. It's trying to anchor itself. Use the ones who spoke it as roots. Zinzi's hands trembled. How do we stop something that was never supposed to be remembered? The journal fluttered open on its own and burst with gold light. One page flipped, then locked in place, where Chinello saw a new symbol. The spiral, inverted and broken. Beneath it only 4 words. Seal it in story. Chinello gasped. We have to trap it in a tale, a loop, a folktale, one that remembers for us but contains it. Kwame's eyes widened, like the bell did, but with words. With narrative, Zinzi snapped. Then start telling. Amara stepped forward, raising her voice. There once was a name so old it forgot itself. And as she spoke, the bell shuddered. Because stories are stronger than truth, and remembering is not the same as freeing. But the bell, Kithari Ryan, was still forming. and they were running out of pages. The wind roared like a storm of whispers. The sky trembled beneath the growing weight of Kithari Ryan, its bone bell twisting and folding into something that defied sight. It was no longer just a shape. It was concept made flesh, memory given hunger. Students stood still, their mouths moving, eyes blank, repeating its name like a hymn without rhythm. And still the bell did not ring. It devoured. Amara stood at the front of the courtyard, voice trembling, eyes locked on the journal as Chinello held it open. Her voice rose like a drumbeat. There once was a name so old, it burned its letters into trees. The tree pulsed, its bark split, and vines coiled outward, reaching, not to spread, but to wrap around the memory. Zinzi joined in, reciting the tale like a ritual. It was a name without mother or mouth, a bell that never rang but always listened. The sky crackled with red light. Kithari Rien paused, its form uncertain. Chinello read from the glowing journal, filling the gaps between legend and control. They tried to forget it, bury it beneath bells and vaults. But the children remembered, not to call it, but to keep it. Kwame stepped forward, voice low, steady. Because some names should not be erased, but they must never be spoken whole. The ground responded, roots wrapped around the bell-shaped tree. The courtyard shimmered like an illusion folding. Amara shouted the closing line. And so they turned the name into a story, told only when the soil trembled, and never twice the same. A silence fell. The bell in the sky screamed, not aloud but inward, and imploded, folded in on itself, and vanished. The students collapsed, gasping. The sky was whole again, the bone bell was gone, but in the journal a new title had written itself, The Bell Before the Bell. The sky held still, blue, ordinary, as if it had never cracked. The students who had been speaking in unison now stirred, blinking with confusion. Some fell to their knees, others cried without knowing why. A few looked at Chinello, Amara, Zinzi, and Kwame, and remembered, just for a second. Then it faded. The story had taken hold. It worked. They had sealed Kithari Ryan in a tale too tangled to escape. Not a prison of stone or time, but of imagination. A fable, ever-changing. It could no longer be summoned, only told, and only by those who understood the price of remembering. Chinello sat under the now-still tree, the journal open on her lap. The title on the final page had finished writing itself. The Bell Before the Bell. A folk tale not to be shared twice. Below it, a single sentence. Should it be spoken the same way twice, it remembers its name. She closed the journal and wrapped it in cloth. They had saved the school. But not by forgetting. By telling carefully. Kwame paced near the garden, casting glances at the tree. We need more than a guard now. We need a guild. A guild of what? Zinzi asked, arms crossed. He looked at her. Of storytellers. Amara nodded slowly. Not historians, not teachers, keepers. People who tell the story when the earth shakes, when roots cry, when someone dreams of a bell that doesn't ring. Chinello looked around at the school, now alive again with normal sounds. Laughter, footsteps, a whistle blown by a teacher calling late students. Normal. For now. But in her chest, she still felt the echo. A space left by a name that should never be spoken, but must never be lost. She whispered it once more. Only once, in her mind. And the tree pulsed. They met beneath the tree at dusk. 5 lanterns, 1 journal, a single flame at the center. Chinello, Kwame, Amara, Zinzi, and a 5th, Ngozi, a first-year student who had started dreaming of spirals and bells before ever hearing the story. Her arrival was no accident. The bell always called the next. Chinello handed her the journal. You won't understand everything at once, she said, but you'll know what matters. Ngozi opened the book carefully. Do I read it all? No, Amara replied. You feel it. The journal doesn't give you answers, it gives you weight. Zinzi added. And once you carry it, you can't put it down. Not really. Kwame unwrapped a cloth bundle from his bag and revealed 5 tokens, each carved from bark, shaped like a bell with roots for a handle. We wear these when we tell the tale, when someone needs to remember. Ngozi hesitated. Will it come back? The question hung in the air. Chinelo looked toward the tree. Its branches no longer bled. Its bark was sealed, but it still stood taller than it had weeks ago, still watching. No, she said finally, not as long as we keep telling it, shaping it, guarding it. They lit the lanterns one by one and placed them in a circle around the base of the tree. Then, as the sky turned violet and the school lights flickered on in the distance, Chinelo began to speak. Long ago, a bell rang where no bell stood, and the others joined her, not in chorus, but in rhythm, each adding their version, their truths, their scars, a folk tale, a warning, a lullaby made of memory, and beneath them, deep in the soil, the roots of the tree pulsed once, but did not move. The bell was silent, because it was listening. The guild met every new moon. It became tradition. They passed the journal around the circle, each member contributing a new version of the story. Sometimes it was poetic, sometimes raw, sometimes silent. And always, it ended differently, because they knew. If the story was ever told the same way twice, Kithari Ryan would remember. Months passed. The school healed. And beyond Abongweni, echoes stirred. People in the village nearby began reporting dreams, spirals in the sand, trees that whispered. One boy claimed he heard a bell ringing in a cave near the hills. His father laughed. Until he vanished for 3 days. When he returned, he was humming a tune no one recognized, and drawing the spiral again and again in the dirt. The guild was alerted. Chinelo, now a mentor to the younger keepers, read through the boy's sketchbook. At first, just rough spirals. But one page stopped her cold. It was the story, their story. Written nearly word for word, an early version, told by Kwame in the second circle meeting. Panic rose in her chest. She called the others. It's spreading, Amara said, her voice heavy. The story's moving on its own. Zinzi flipped through the boy's sketches. Someone outside the guild has told it exactly. Kwame clenched his fists. We thought the danger was the bell. Chinelo looked at the journal, now trembling faintly in her hands. No, she said. The danger is memory with no keeper, a story told without care. Without context, a knock at the door interrupted them. It was Ngozi. I found someone else, she whispered. She said she's heard the tale before, but it ended differently. Chinelo's heart sank, because if someone had already changed the story, then the bell wasn't asleep. It was curious. They met the girl in the chapel basement, where sound carried oddly and candles never seemed to burn out. She was young, maybe 13, with eyes too old and a voice too calm. My grandmother told me the story, she said, legs crossed, gaze fixed on Chinelo. But in hers, the bell wasn't stopped. It won. Silence fell across the circle. Zinzi frowned. There is no version like that. We've never recorded it that way. The girl nodded. That's why I knew I had to come. She said the version that ends in silence is only half true. Kwame stepped forward. What was her name? The girl paused, then smiled faintly. Essie. Every breath in the room vanished. Chinelo stepped closer. That's not possible. Essie passed her memory to us, to me. She's gone. The girl tilted her head. Then why do I remember her voice more clearly than my mother's? Amara crouched beside her. What else did she tell you? The girl reached into her bag and pulled out a small wooden charm. shaped like a bell, but twisted, its rim jagged, its core hollow. The wood was old, older than it should be. She called it the second tongue. She said it was what comes when a story grows too many roots. It no longer listens. It speaks for itself. The journal in Chinello's satchel trembled violently. New ink flooded the pages. Shapes, not words. Spirals folding into mouths. And at the top of one page, the story that tells itself. Chinello whispered, "It's not curious anymore." Zinzi finished the thought. "It's writing." From the chapel ceiling, a faint chime rang. No bell in sight. Just sound, born not from memory, but from imagination set free. The chime echoed long after it should have faded. No one moved. The girl, Essie's supposed granddaughter, sat still, clutching the warped wooden bell. She hummed under her breath now, a melody that sounded like it was trying to remember itself. Too old, too familiar, too wrong. The journal lay on the chapel floor, open, writing, by itself. Lines crawled across the page like vines, looping, overlapping, refusing to form full words. Only symbols, only intent. And then a title appeared at the top. Chapter 61. Chinello's blood turned cold. "There's only supposed to be 60. Kwame shook his head slowly. "The story is growing past us." Amara whispered, "It's not a record anymore. It's a living thing." Zinzi stepped back. "This is what happens when memory becomes self-aware. The bell doesn't need us to protect or carry it anymore. It's found a new host." They all turned to the girl. Her humming stopped. She smiled. She said the real story doesn't end with sealing. It ends with becoming. The bell isn't just sound. It's the urge to remember, to repeat, to reshape. The warped bell in her hands pulsed faintly. Kwame reached for it cautiously. "If it's becoming a story that tells itself, then it's unstoppable," Chinello finished. "Unless we overwrite it. Lock it back in our version." "But it's writing faster than we can," Amara said. A new page flipped. Chapter 62. Zinzi's voice cracked. "It's winning." Chinello's eyes narrowed. She took the journal, pressed her palm to the page, and whispered, "Then we don't tell the next chapter. We trap it." Amara stared at her. "In what?" Chinello looked up, face set with purpose. "In an ending so final even memory won't chase it." And the bell rang again. But this time, only once. Like a door closing. The bell's single chime echoed like a heartbeat refusing to stop. The chapel floor cracked. A spiral unfurled beneath their feet, carved by invisible hands, glowing faintly with ink. Not red, not black. Something older than either, a color you could only feel. The journal flipped to chapter 63, then 64. The story was no longer waiting for permission. It was unspooling into the world. And with it, the girl in the chapel, Essie's echo, stood, holding the warped wooden bell. Her eyes now flickered like candle flames. "The story doesn't need authors anymore," she said gently. "It just needs listeners." Chinello stepped forward, the real journal pressed to her chest. "You're wrong. Stories don't survive because people listen. They survive because people care. Because we choose to carry them." Amara joined her, voice steady. "We gave this tale a spine. You're letting it grow teeth." Kwame lit a match and dropped it into the spiral on the floor. The flame vanished instantly, but the spiral recoiled, shrinking inward like it had been hurt. Zinzi hissed, "It's sensitive to endings." Chinello nodded. "Then that's what we give it." She opened the journal to the final page, still blank, and began to write, not in ink but with her blood. Each word cost her memory, each sentence, a piece of her own past. "This is the last chapter. There will be no more names. There will be no more bells. Only silence, chosen freely. A story cannot continue if the last word is given. As she wrote the final word, enough, the journal burst into golden flame. The warped bell in the girl's hands cracked. The spiral vanished, and the chapel was silent. Not cursed, not paused, finished. Chinello collapsed. But she smiled. Because the story had stopped. The sun rose quietly over Abongweni. Not with drama, not with ringing, with peace. For the first time in what felt like years, the tree in the courtyard stood still, not watching, not pulsing, just present. Its bark was whole, its roots held firm in clean, unbroken soil. No bells, no symbols, just wood. The journal was gone, consumed. Its ashes had scattered like seeds, each word sewn into memory, not paper. And Chinello? She slept for 3 days. When she woke, her voice was soft but sure. She remembered enough. Not everything, but enough. Amara sat beside her bed, holding a fresh-bound book, blank pages, soft leather, unmarked. "It's yours now," she said. Chinello touched it carefully. "There's no bell left to guard." Amara smiled. "There's always a bell. We just choose whether to fear it, or retell it." Zinzi had already begun gathering new students. Those who dreamed in spirals, those who hummed without knowing why. Not to prepare for a curse, but to keep the lesson alive. Stories are alive. Memory is powerful, but endings are sacred. Kwame led a team into the hills where the village once stood. They planted 5 trees, no symbols, no carvings, just quiet things that would grow. The girl, Easy's echo, left the school soon after, not banished, not feared. She smiled as she left, whispering, "Thank you for finishing it." I think she would have wanted that. And Chinello? She never rang another bell, but she told the story once a year to those who truly listened. Never the same way, never twice, because the true bell was not forged or grown or named. It was chosen, and in the silence that followed, the world moved forward, unlooped, unburdened, remembered,